now?
It's pretty
Okay, so we left off, you were talking about technology, and you had mentioned air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
I will agree that is a great invention. Anything else you can think of? Or?
Oh, there's a lot of things. A lot of the things in the kitchen, dishwashers, for example, have really freed women up for a lot of work. But what about the washing machine, for crying out loud? That really freed women up from lots of backbreaking work, when you had your automatic washers, and that was just a wonderful, probably more so than dishwashers, really, the washing machine, because dishwashing is kind of a chore, but it wasn't something that broke your back. And I can remember that women in years ago, they'd just be about done in on Mondays after they did their wash. I mean, it was not only a long, arduous process, but it took a lot of energy out of them. They were just worn out by the time they'd done a week's washing for a big family, on a Monday, and which they usually, people kept pretty much to that for years and years and years. They washed on Monday.
Well, okay, so we talked about a sort of a readjustment period after Grandpa got back from the war, and then, so after that time, what was your career and what was Grandpa's career? And
Okay.
I guess we can sort of go up to maybe 1954.
Well, at that, when Dwight came back, he worked for the Corps of Engineers on Kannapolis, and then we lived in Ellis, Kansas, and he worked on a Bureau of Reclamation dam there, and he worked for Bureau of Reclamation. From there we went to Superior, and he worked on an irrigation canals at Superior that went from way out in western Nebraska clear down to somewhere around Clay Center. It's the Republican River. He worked on canals, irrigation canals on the Republican River, all the way from some big dam out in the middle of Nebraska to someplace in Kansas, and it's someplace in north central Kansas where it's around Concordia, but I can't think where it was. But that was those dams, not dams, but those irrigation canals were all the way from those two places. Then we went to Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
And what was your job? Were you working?
I wasn't working
Just
at all
taking
at
care
that time, and I was working, but I was
Right.
I was
Not being paid.
I was being a housewife at that time and a mother, and then we went from Superior. We were there 2 years, and we went to Oak Ridge,
Tennessee.
Tennessee, and we lived there for a little over 2 years, and we came back to Hutchinson because Dad had always wanted to. It didn't work out, and it was very disappointing to him, but he had always wanted to have his own engineering business. And we tried to start it, but, I don't know. Probably we didn't have enough money to last for the time it probably takes to start a good business. But anyway, and at that time, I decided I better get a job. So I got a job teaching at Hutch High, teaching English at Hutch High. And also at that time, our second child, Chuck, was born.
I was going to say, I thought there was something missing.
Yeah, when we moved back from Oak Ridge, Chuck was just basically 3 months old, I think it was. Let's see.
And was Dad planned, or was he a surprise?
Oh yeah, Dad had been planned for 10 years. We'd been trying to have more children, and so it was a joyous time when I got pregnant with him, and to have him was a joyous time.
And did you know he was a boy, or?
No, at that time, if anybody knew about it, I didn't know about it, because I don't think they had any tests for that, or I don't know. But no, I didn't. We had a girl's name and a boy's name. And
What was the girl's name?
Diane something. Diane Well, it was Diane. I can't remember. Seemed like it was some family name, but I can't. Anyway, I don't know. But I do know it was Diane and Charles. Charles was chosen because your dad had an uncle named Charles, and I had an uncle named Charles, and we liked the name anyway, you know. And then Dwight was, of course, his dad's name.
And did you ever want to have a girl?
Yeah, I did. Yes, I would have loved to have had a daughter. And I lost a baby after that, and I never even asked whether it was a girl because I felt so bad about it anyway. That, and I don't know. I don't even know to this day. I suppose they could have told, because it wasn't very far along, 2 or 3 months, and I suppose they could have told. I don't know. Do you know? Whether they could have told what sex that was?
A miscarriage, you're saying, at 3 months or 4 months?
I don't.
I don't think so.
Well, I didn't ask, because if they would have told me, that it even made me feel worse, you know, because I had gotten up hopes that maybe this one would be a girl, you know, and
So then Dad was born in March of 1954, and then you moved back to Hutchinson, Kansas, and Grandpa tried to
start a business.
that
And
didn't work out.
it didn't work out, so he decided. I mean, he went back and applied for it. He got a job back with the bureau in Salina at the air base there. They were building a lot of things in connection with the missile silos and things like that. And must have been, was it bureau? You know, he worked for the bureau off and on. He'd worked for the Corps of Engineers off and on, and I get kind of confused about.
I think it was the Corps of Engineers that was building.
I bet it was.
Runways.
I bet it was, because I can't think what the bureau would have been doing at that base, and I bet it was the Corps of Engineers that he was working for there, and we lived in Salina.
And then you got a job
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah. I didn't the first year we went to Salina because Chuck was still little, but the next year he was going to go to kindergarten, and I'd been wanting to go to work ever since, you know, for quite some time. And your father and I, Grandpa and I, had been having quite a few discussions about that because he was in the old school. He thought he should support his family, you know, and he didn't think women ought to work, you know. But he wasn't. But I held out. And I got this job at Salina High School and taught there for 3 years.
I know you moved around a lot. We don't have to go into the specifics of that, but what was that like, raising children and moving and?
Well, you know, probably have to ask the kids more than me as far as I was concerned. I thought we managed it pretty well, to tell you the truth. I made quite an effort to help the kids get adjusted every time we moved, but I don't think it was always easy for them. And but one of the things I always did is, first thing we did when we moved, after the kids came, their room got fixed up first. I mean, no matter what else was done, their room got fixed up. They had their own room with their things in it, so they'd be around familiar things. Then, the next thing I did was volunteer for things like Den Mother, for Cub Scouts, or whatever, you know, any of these kind of organizations where kids belong to. I was Den Mother for as long as you can be Den Mother. You know, I was Den Mother for 3 years with Phil, and Den Mother with 3 years, I believe, with Chuck, because you know, that way that helped them to get acquainted and so on. And then I don't know, you know, tried to do all kinds of things to help them get adjusted and so on. And invited the neighbor kids over to play and all that kind of stuff. Did what I could to make life as easy as possible. And I don't know how hard it was, but
Did you enjoy going to new places?
I kind of liked it. I was prepared for it. Dwight told me when we got married. He said, "You know, you're you're probably going to have to get used to the fact that we're not going to settle down in one place and live forever. You know, he said, engineer's life is just not like that. He said, we'll probably be moving a lot, and he was sure right. We were, and but you know, I thought about some things that there was kind of disappointing that you couldn't do when you only lived a place for 2 years, or 3 years, and so on. But on the other hand, there was a lot of things that were kind of fun about it, and thank God I wasn't somebody who had a terrible time getting acquainted with people. If I'd have been too reserved, I might have had more problems. But I went to church and I used to belong to AAUW, and I went to, any of these things that you could belong to. I went to all of them very religiously, because it was not only because I enjoyed them, but because it was a good way to get acquainted and with new people and
What were Dad and Uncle Phil like growing up? Were they easy to parent, or was it difficult for you?
Oh, they're pretty good kids, really, I thought. They didn't get into any terrible troubles.
Never mind that one of them is in the room right now. You can be.
No, I know that, but no, I don't remember. They did it. I remember one time we had to really kind of scold Chuck, your dad. I don't know whether there were some other kids involved in it or not. I think maybe there were. They might have even been the ringleaders. That's what parents always think. But they were throwing things at vehicles that went down our street. And one guy stopped and got real. Do you remember that?
Honestly, I don't.
Well, you weren't very old, and we didn't spank you or anything, but we just told you that was a very stupid thing to do, and that sort of thing, and everything. That's actually, that wasn't a very bad thing, really. I mean, he was only 7 years old, and that wasn't a terrible thing to do, and that's the worst thing I can think of that he did. And Phil, one time, when he was going to Liberty, he and another fella, some kind of a protest, splashed paint all over not all over, but in a certain area of the school down there, and they got caught, and I got called. We had a long conversation about that, but those are the two worst things, and I don't think by some standards that's terrible things, for two boys, really, but they were pretty good kids, really. They really were.
So then career-wise, so you were teaching,
Yeah.
And how long did you continue?
Well, I taught at Salina for 3 years, and when we moved from Salina, we left off at Salina, weren't we, when Dad got the job at, Well, after I knew that, I realized that I was kind of doing what I thought was best for Chuck, and also because Dwight was not very crazy about my getting a job. But when I knew that he was going to be in kindergarten half a day and so on and everything, I just went out and got a job, and I got a job at the high school, Salina High School. I taught there for 3 years, and it was. Then we moved to Oak Ridge, and
Again?
To
No.
Warrensburg.
Warrensburg.
Yeah, from Salina.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Did I say Oak Ridge?
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. We moved to Warrensburg, and Dad was at an Army base there, Air Force base, at Knob Noster, Missouri, and we lived 10 miles away in Warrensburg. And we moved in July, but I went to see the principal in the high school, and as it happened, he had an opening, and he just was happy to have me, and I stayed there for as long as we stayed in Warrensburg.
And how long were you in Warrensburg?
I think it was 4 years, wasn't it?
And that's where Dad went to high school?
Yes.
And so you were teaching while he was at high school?
But I was teaching in the junior high. I taught ninth grade.
Okay.
And at that time, ninth graders were in our junior high. They're not, they're not now. They don't even call it junior high
So you
anymore.
didn't get to see Dad.
I had him 1 year.
And there actually were 2 Warrensburg times, and the first time we were just there 2 years, and I was in 3rd and 4th grade.
Yeah.
And then we moved to Colorado.
Yeah, that's right. And then and then after that, the next time rather, he was in an English class that I had when he was in high school.
Okay.
I have to tell you, I've never forgotten it. I thought it was cute and everything. But kids in high school, they don't like for their mothers to be their teachers or anything like that. And he was real good about it. But we'd go down the hall, and he would be in the hall, and every once in a while I would see him take his hand and go kind of like that as a greeting. But he didn't ever say anything to me, and he didn't ever make it obvious that he was greeting me, because he was being polite, but on the other hand, he didn't want the kids to know about this, and I understood all this. It didn't bother me in the least, but I thought it was kind of funny, really. It was kind of cute.
Is there a favorite, maybe that's it, is there a favorite story you like to tell about Uncle Phil or Dad? Something that sticks out in your mind?
Oh, there's lots of things. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. When your dad was in junior high, they had a program every 9 weeks. They picked out an honor student, and gave them some awards and put their name in the paper and everything. And the teachers did it, and he was such a favorite with the teachers that I finally had to say to the teachers, they did him 3 years, 3 times, and I said, listen, this isn't doing him any good. The kids are going to resent it, and he's had enough honors, and lay off of that, because. But they kept voting for him as he was a very, very outstanding student and a very honorable student, and he did a lot of good things and so on. And then let me see. One of the things that I've always been the proudest about Phil was that he was very caring about things, and we had good friends. He was friends with some boys. Actually, by the time this happened, he was in college down at Central Warrensburg. One of our friends lost their little girl, and she was the youngest of the family. And his friends were 2 boys that were about his same age, one a year older and one a year younger than he was, but they'd been good friends. And we'd actually known them someplace else, and darned if I know where it was that we knew them someplace else, because we'd run into them someplace else. That happened after you get to moving around quite a bit. You eventually meet up with some of the same people, but they lost this darling little girl, and it was so tragic. I forget, she got some kind of a terrible illness and just died almost immediately. Well, I heard afterwards, which I thought I've never forgotten, I thought it was pretty darn remarkable myself, because Phil was only 18 at the time. We had just moved there, and he was his first year we were there. And his mother told me later that it was very comforting to her. He came and visited with her for 2 hours after they lost that little girl. Within a day or so, he was over there and came to visit with her. And she appreciated that so much. And I thought, well, a lot of kids would feel sorry for her, but that's not something that most kids would do on their own, without anybody taking them along or anything. But I didn't even know he'd gone. He just went over there, and she told me afterwards how much that meant to her. And I don't know, that's just something I remember. I'm sure there's things about both boys that were equally as good, but those are 2 things that came to mind that I've always thought about a lot. And one thing about Chuck. I threatened to take the telephone off the hook, because when he was in high school, you could tell maybe he was going to be some kind of a lawyer or something like that, because every kid that got into any kind of problems with his girlfriend or in trouble or with his parents or anything, they always called Chuck and talked to him forever about this, And he was kind of well, I don't know what to say.
Oprah?
Yeah, but yeah, he was the kid. They all called him. They all thought Chuck would have the answer, or would help him some way or other. And I don't know, he probably did, or they wouldn't have kept calling him, But I always thought that was. it was kind of funny, although it was always sometime at mealtime or something like that that they'd call, you know, and then the phone would be tied up for quite a long time, you know, because of these long conversations. But then, I don't know if Chuck remembers that or not, but...
So let's see. So you're moving around a lot at this point, and you're still getting teaching jobs. At some point, you go back to school.
Yeah, I went back to school at Warrensburg. That was really the first. I always wanted to get a master's, but that was the first time I'd ever been anywhere. Actually, that's not quite true. I took two courses, graduate courses at Marymount College. Well, they called them graduate. I'm not sure they ever gave a master's, but anyway, I did go to school at Marymount when I was teaching at Salina and took some literature courses. But when I got down to Warrensburg, that was an opportunity because they had a regular 4-year college there and everything, and so I went to school there, and I got my master's the same year that Chuck got out of high school in '72. I mean,
And what was your master's in?
English. Well, not entirely. English was, come to think about it, that's what I started, but I decided, here I was always changing my mind, I guess, but actually I wasn't very happy with the English courses. That I didn't really think they were ready. So I just, my two bosses, they kept telling me, Edna, take a counseling course, get a degree in counseling. And she said, that's a good course, and we're always looking for good counselors. So I changed to counseling and kept my minor in English. I still took some graduate English courses, but I got my master's in counseling and guidance.
So this would have been about the time, I just want to ask you about some of the circumstances about the time period. So this would have been around Vietnam, and this would have also later, but it would have been sort of around the civil rights movement.
Yeah, would be.
I wanted to ask, with our new president, Obama, I wanted to ask what that means to you. How much of a change is it from, the beginning of your life?
Oh, well, it's a tremendous change. It really is, And of course, I was always I guess, civil rights movement was after we were married by quite a bit, wasn't it? And so, it wasn't, I don't know how I could have done anything other than support it in various ways, which I did, like with a little money here and there or something like that. But I was always right behind them as far as that was concerned. And in Vietnam, I was like a lot of people. I thought it was all right to begin with. I didn't have any strong feeling, but I began to have some pretty strong feelings after about a year or so. And by the time, it had gone on 2 or 3 years, I had some very strong feelings about it. So strong that I probably made some people mad. But on the other hand, I did say sometimes. And I remember when I got that job in Warrensburg the first time, I remember a conversation I had with the principal, and I don't think he felt that way about it that I did. But I said, he was asking me about it, and I didn't say a whole lot. I didn't go into a whole lot about it, but I remember telling him, I said, well, it looks to me like this is just terrible. And I said, I'm not sure, but what if I had a son? I'd encourage him to go to Canada. And of course, that was heresy. It really was. Your dad thought it was heresy too, Chuck. He didn't approve of that. He didn't exactly approve of the war, but he thought it was heresy that I was saying that I would have encouraged the boys to go to Canada if I thought they were going to get drafted. I felt that strongly about how wasteful and sinful that whole war was, But anyway, that's the way I felt about it. And
sort of leads into another question. What, if you could identify with a political party, what would it be?
Well, the funny thing about it is my dad was about as good a Republican as you could ever get. Now, I don't think my dad would have been the kind of Republican that they have today. I really don't. because he was a bull moose. You read about that? You know, Theodore Roosevelt, you know, broke away from the traditional Republican Party and started his own party, and that was the first guy that my dad voted for was Theodore Roosevelt. He was that kind of a, you know, I mean, but and I really, you know, my mother didn't say much. My mother canceled every one of my dad's votes all the time they were married. My mother was a Democrat, but she didn't argue about it. She just did it, you know. And she wasn't as good a talker as Dad, and she probably knew that. But anyway, she didn't let him turn her into a Republican. But he turned me into a Republican, and I guess he turned all of the kids, at least. I don't know about all my brothers and sisters. I think at least for the time being, in our early days, we were all Republicans, and I was. But I began to have different feelings about it. Maybe your dad can help me a little bit, but Chuck can help me a little bit. That convention out in California, where they treated Rockefeller so rotten.
1968.
Yeah. That was just the beginning of the end as far as my being a Republican is concerned, because that was just outrageous as far as I was concerned, the way they ran that convention and so on and everything. And but I wouldn't say that I hadn't ever. Now, my sister Barbara was a Republican, and you know, she wouldn't have been this kind of a Republican, the kind that we had today, you know, you got today, but she was on the Republican Party, and she won some political office, you know, she ran for office as a Republican. And but I'm sorry, folks, I lost my train of thought.
Politics. Your
Yeah.
sister Barbara.
Oh, yes. It was Barbara. I began to think, well, I'm not very happy about being a Republican. But there was an election in Kansas between two very good people. I still think that. And one of them was Nancy Kassebaum, and one of them was a doctor from Topeka, and I can't think of his name. But he was who I was going to vote for. He was a Democrat. But Barbara had met and knew Nancy Kassebaum, and she kept telling me, she said, Eddie, she's a wonderful person. And I remember about 2 or 3 days before the election, Barbara called me, and I was on the phone for an hour. And the whole time she was promoting Nancy Kassebaum and telling me I should vote for Nancy Kassebaum. And you know, to this day, I don't remember whether I did or not. I kind of think maybe I promised I would, and I'm not sure I did or not. I don't really know who I voted for. But I always said to her afterwards, you know, this other guy would have been a good senator. I don't think that he's a good man. He's still alive, the last I knew. You know, I've seen him, but I can't think. Who is it, Chuck?
Bill Roy.
Bill Roy, Dr. Bill Roy from Topeka. He's a good man, and he would have been a good senator too. But I never was sorry about Nancy Kassebaum becoming a senator. I would have voted for her ever if she wanted to stay in there, because I thought she was a wonderful public servant, you know. But she was about the last Republican that I can think of that I thought was a tremendous public servant, you know, that I had a chance to vote for, you know. And I have to say that I am still a registered Republican, and I just throw away all this stuff they send me, you know. But the reason I'm a registered Republican, if there are any choices in Kansas, it's in the primary with the Republicans. And so, you know, I felt like it was more important to make a choice, because I felt like it was a Republican that was going to win. Most of the time they do, and so I felt it was more important to make my choice about which Republican would end up being it. Although in recent times I've had several Democrats that I've voted for with joy, and in state business, and I haven't voted for a Republican for president for, well, I don't remember when it was. It's been a long time. I can't remember, because I know I voted for Carter, and I voted for Bill Clinton, and I voted for the two that lost here in the last 8 years, you know.
Did you
Of
vote
course,
for Nixon?
who was running against him?
Humphrey?
I voted for Humphrey.
Probably voted for Johnson, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And probably voted for Kennedy, didn't you?
Yes,
Might have been Eisenhower then, the last Republican.
it might have been. It might have been. Eisenhower was the last. But I was basically.
Well, no, you did. You voted for Adlai Stevenson both times.
Yes, I did, didn't
Yeah,
I? Yes,
yeah.
I did. Yes. I felt just like crying when he said, you know, he felt like crying and I felt like crying too,
Yeah.
because I thought he was such a wonderful man, you know, and
Mhm.
everything. But, so basically, you know,
Okay. Well, let's sort of go from maybe when your kids left for college. What experience? I mean, what was that like for you? Joyous, sad.
well, it wasn't exactly joyous, but, you know, I didn't just sit around and mope because they were gone or anything. This is just a funny aside, but when Chuck went to college, the next month our water bill was $15 less than it had been all the time he'd been home.
Because of showers?
Yes. He was such a nut about cleanliness that he took 3 or 4 showers every day, it seemed like to me. But that was the truth. Our water bill went down about $15. Of course, part of it was washing, I suppose, you know. I mean, on top of everything else, he was a nut about having clean clothes and, you know, was always, you know, changing his clothes 2 or 3 times a day and that sort of thing.
Okay.
None of these are bad things, actually. I'd lot rather they'd be that way than somebody you had to beg and holler at to get to change their clothes, you know, that sort. I never fussed at him about it. My mother, when she lived with us, Grandma, she didn't feel like she said very much to Chuck. My parents were wonderful. They didn't interfere at all. They lived with us quite a few months quite a few years off and on, you know. But they never got into any of the decisions, and they never criticized it. But Grandma was always going around and picking up the clothes that the kids had discarded, and she would iron them again, because she said, they're not dirty, Edna Marie, they're just wrinkled, and they haven't worn them a half a day, and she'd go around, pick them up and iron them and put them back hang them up in the closet. She'd never say anything to them, but I knew she was doing it, you know, and I didn't care. It was all right with me. Okay, but
So after they left for college, and were you working still at this point?
well, see. Well, I'm trying to think. I got
72, you would have been about 55?
Yeah, I was working. I was working for at least 2 or 3 years after you were in college, wasn't I? I didn't. When we went to, what were you? Were you a sophomore or a junior when we went to Warren?
Actually, you were working in Warrensburg when I went to college, and I then went. And when I was a sophomore, you moved to Beloit.
And I didn't work then. I did eventually after Dad died. We taught a year at Beloit, but I didn't work for 4 or 5 years then after he was in. And I'm trying to think when Phil was in college, mostly when we were in Warrensburg, and I was teaching then. Yeah.
And so, sort of, after they had gone to college and before Grandpa died, what was your life like then?
Yeah, pretty carefree. We did quite a few fun things together. Mm-hmm.
And you moved to Beloit because?
Well, because I wanted to move back to Kansas. And we looked at several communities around, and we didn't have any particular place in mind, you know, but I don't think we were thinking about western Kansas, far western Kansas, but any place other than that would have been okay. We even went down to Manhattan, looked around, and I don't know, maybe I was kind of sorry at times we didn't stay there, but Dad said, well, he said, I don't know. A college town may be too fast-paced for us old folks, you know, and so he kind of he decided, and I'm not sure that was a good decision, but then anyway, that's why, and I didn't care. And we looked around up in north central Kansas because that was close to wasn't too far from my folks, and was close to Carl and Barbara and Alice, all of whom lived within relatively easy driving. And Dwight's sister lived just in north central Kansas, and I always thought of her. I was just as fond of her as I was of my sister. She was a wonderful woman. And we looked in several towns. I had always wanted to fix up an old house, a Victorian house. But when you're moving around every 2 or 3 years, you can't afford to be looking at Victorian houses because you'd never get them fixed up and they'd be hard to sell again probably. But so we looked in half a dozen communities up in that area and saw this one in Beloit that we liked and thought, and we were sort of dismayed after we moved it in there to discover it was one of the streets that the high school kids drove up and down on all night long, especially on the weekends. But then we liked the house, and it was a nice house. It was a nice old Victorian house, and people had started working on it, and they'd done quite a bit, but we did a lot after we got there. We did a whole new kitchen, for one thing, and then Dad did quite a bit more things, but the main thing we did that was needed doing was to do it needed a new kitchen, and we did put in a new kitchen, carpeted it, and did a few things like that, but it had quite a bit done to it. And
Did you get it just like you wanted it? Did you
oh,
complete the...
I thought it looked pretty good, to tell you the truth. I mean, I expected if money had been no object, I expect there had been things I would have done. One of the things we would have done if we'd stayed there longer would have been put air conditioning in. It had a very good window air conditioner, one of those great huge things, downstairs and then 2 upstairs in the bedrooms, so we were comfortable enough. We had room air conditioners, but we would have probably put in central air if we'd stayed there long enough, but we weren't uncomfortable. I mean, we didn't suffer from the heat or anything.
And then when did Grandpa die?
Well, let me think. It was March 15th.
1980? Is that right?
Was it 1980? March 15th, 1980. Yep.
And what was that like for you? I mean, I can't imagine.
It was just about did me in. I just didn't see much point in living. But, you do. And I just never thought, I'd already been thinking about when we celebrated our 40th. I wasn't sure we would make it to 50, but I thought for sure we would make it to 40. And I'd already been thinking about, that would have been 82, wouldn't it? And I was already thinking about that, and I never dreamed he'd die as young as he did, but he did. And to this day, I'm not sure what I think. Maybe it was working around those darn silos that did it to him, but I don't know that.
Do you need a break?
Yeah, I need to go to the bathroom, and I need to